Hi, everyone. How are you? Having a good GDC so far? It's my first time, so I'm real excited to be here. In 2014, I stumbled into GDC by accident and was like, this place looks really cool. What's this? And now here I am, so lucky me. First, before we start, everyone please silence all noisemakers. Keep your masks on. I'm the only person who gets to have my mask off, special me. And let's get to it. So, welcome, everyone, to Up Close and Virtual, the power of live VR actors. Thank you for being here. My name is Alex Coulombe, and I am an architect turned ex-architect, which looks cooler when it's written out. And I'm thrilled to talk to you today about the power of expressive live actors inside detail-rich virtual reality worlds. I've been fortunate to peek into what I think is a rapidly democratizing future, and I'm eager to share it with all of you today. I'm hoping this talk will be useful for anyone who might consider utilizing a live performer, or 5, or 500 in their game or show or ractive. Does anyone know what a ractive is? No? We'll get to that later, don't worry. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm real excited and passionate about this topic. So to set the stage for why I'm here today, I'd like to open with, first of all, just a very quick rundown of a bunch of words that I would go over in more detail if this was a longer talk, but you're just gonna have to look at that for a second and say like, yeah, that's cool. Good job, Alex. And I just kind of boil it down to, I think of myself as a designer, tool maker, educator, and I'm real good at Photoshop, so I'm fine there. But I want to take you back to 2008 in London, which was kind of a formative time for me. I was studying abroad at Syracuse University, both architecture as well as theater. And I had this lovely professor, Michael Barclay, who had all the hookups in London, and he had the ability to bring us to the first 3 rows of pretty much every theater show in the city. And I had never experienced before that power of being up close and personal with some of the world's greatest performers, live and intimate and sweaty. And as an example, let me talk to you about watching Ralph Fiennes in Oedipus. And what I would have expected, and turned out to be true, of course, is that he's terrifying when you're 10 feet away from him, and the raw emotion and the big moments absolutely land, and they would have landed if I was further back. But what really struck me was the smaller, quieter, gentler, more intimate moments. And sorry, I forgot to do more big emotion, but then the smaller, quieter, more intimate moments were different from what I was expecting. There was a nuance and a subtlety that was only really perceivable if you can see the whites of an actor's eyes that close. And there's nothing quite like that. It's different from a cinematic close-up, and it's different from watching that same live show, but from the nosebleed seats, 30 rows back. So I came away from that semester thinking about how technology could start to allow that experience to become more accessible. And imagining, what if you don't need the in-person audience? What if there's a way to virtualize that audience and give them a way to get very, very close to a performance that they would otherwise not have access to? Because Broadway, West End, these things are expensive. You might not get to travel there. There's limited tickets. So this question just kind of sat with me for a while of, can technology help to democratize the incredibly rarefied experience of world-class front row live theater? So we'll fast forward real quick through what I got up to in my thesis. I did a giant immersive theater on Fort Jay on Governor's Island. I had my first AR experience in 2009 and 2010, and how to explain that. I went to design theaters as an architect, which was great, and started using virtual reality in 2013, because that allowed us to be able to say, hey, don't just look at the picture of sitting in the seat. Now you're actually inside the theater, and you know exactly what's happening in there. And that led to some really wonderful designs of theaters where we had an understanding of what the building was going to look like far before it was actually built, because we visualized it in virtual reality. And that led to doing some cool things in places like the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York City with projection mapping, and Kenneth Branagh's Macbeth, where we were visualizing shows before they actually went up into a physical stage, and the Shed in Hudson Yards, which was a crazy custom project unlike any theater I'd ever been in before. And in 2015, I got to take virtual reality from conceptual design all the way through later on in the design process, as well as thinking about how other people were going to use it. Along the way, started to look more and more at virtual events, virtual theater. We did a study for Samsung of live streaming events in 360 using some powerful stereoscopic cameras into the Gear VR. Started to play with some new tools from Intel to simulate very enormous stadium experiences. And then in 2019, we started to wrap up building the Brockman Hall for Opera, which was this project which got to be in VR from conception through completion. And we were pretty happy with how close it was to what we were visualizing inside VR. And now we're doing some fun stuff where we'll actually like mock up physical sets and balconies, like in this case, and then be able to like lean on the balcony and you're in VR and you get a really strong sense of how that feels. But eventually I started to realize that I was interested not only in using virtual reality and augmented reality and all sorts of emerging tech to visualize events and buildings in the real world, but also events and buildings that were only ever going to live in virtual reality. And I have a whole other talk about the architecture side of this, if you're ever interested in learning more about what I think makes good virtual architecture. But I want to fast forward into December of a couple months ago, where all these thoughts about what makes an incredible virtual performance on my mind, we ended up doing something that looked a little like this.
And we are live, my dears. Yes, we are. Now, we begin.
Oops, sorry, I clicked off the thing.
A Christmas Carol.
God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay.
Mercy! Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Just a little taste of what happened there, and as Ari Tar, our Scrooge Ractor there, explained at the beginning, this was an entirely live performance. This little 2-minute teaser actually came out after the show based on the live data that we just captured as audience members during it. And yes, the virtual audience was all in $300 VR headsets, streaming wirelessly using cloud computers. And during the show, they could move around anywhere they liked as little ghost flames, as you see here, as part of a collective haunting of Scrooge. We cast everyone in the audience as additional ghosts that had, some beef with Scrooge for different reasons. We gave everyone random Victorian names. It was real nice and immersive. And to my knowledge, this was the first show of its kind to bring this level of Unreal Engine fidelity to a live VR audience in a many, many, many million polygon world. And Christmas Carol, by the way, did also have a live component to it that happened in real life, and it looked a little bit like this. Here's the live actor, Greg Maupin, and some of the sketches from the costume designers at Actors Theater. Same idea over here for the Ghost of Christmas Present. And it's good to think about the fact that, first of all, what you might have noticed right away is that obviously there's different things that happen in the VR version of a show versus a physical version, scale being an obvious one. We could make the Ghost of Christmas Present and Future enormous, whereas in the physical version, they were limited to what we could actually put there. Oops, sorry, is that gonna play? There we go. I just want this in the background while I tell a little story. So how did I get to that point where we actually got to put on a live show like that? So let's rewind 3 months earlier, fall of 2021. It's like I've never said that year before. And the extremely prestigious Actors Theater of Louisville called me up, and Zach Mikerbuzzy and Robert Barry Fleming asked if my XR creative studio in New York City, Agile Lens, would be interested in helping them create motion capture recordings of the ghosts for their one-man production. Oh, it's not even playing anymore because I'm over here. There we go. The ghosts of their, I just got to pull my notes in for a second, sorry. Here we go. Right. This is just ambient, production footage. They asked me if I could help them create motion capture recordings of the ghosts for their one-man production of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. They had a mocap suit. They wanted to make some recordings. They wanted us to create characters and render out videos that they could use inside the theater, as you saw for Scrooge actor Greg Maupin to play off of. And I said, recordings. You want recordings for flat video? Okay, cool. But But did you guys know that I'm also building this new company called HeavenU, which is a portmanteau of heaven and venue because it's a venue up in the clouds where we're trying to take the lessons that we've learned from all these years of custom XR experiences and putting on live performances in social VR. And wouldn't it be great to coalesce that into a platform that would allow a worldwide audience to see your show live and interactively together? And wouldn't you like to do that as well? And they said, sure. But you really think we can have a IVR and IRL version of the show both ready for December? And like a monster, I said, sure, no problem. Now, the original idea was actually just to have...
For everything maidens could wish for.
Then why no?
Do why no?
The girl must be mad.
Right, and this is what we were studying just like a month before they had asked us to come work on the show, which was what happens if you start to bring these live actors into Unreal Engine and render it on the cloud in real time. So we felt like we were ready to take this to the masses. And Greg Maupin, Scrooge again, actually was originally supposed to be wearing a motion capture suit under his costume, and then during the show, we'd be broadcasting exactly what he was doing in real life to the virtual audience as well. But he actually felt that that was a little bit beyond his interest as an actor. So that's how we ended up hiring VR actor, ractor extraordinaire, Ari Tar, who I've worked with on a few productions now. And this actually worked out pretty well because, as my previous experience had shown, which we'll get a little bit more to in a bit, if you do a one-to-one twin of a digital live performance, you're actually missing out a little bit on the opportunities of what can only happen inside that digital medium. So, quick break for some terms. IRL, I say, of course, in real life, IVR in VR, and then ractive and ractor actually come from a book that Neil Stephenson wrote a couple years after Snow Crash, where the M word unfortunately came from, which has been used to death. I will not speak its name, but this one I find pretty compelling because when he talks about ractors and ractives, it starts to separate out what you might think of as traditional theater from something that is much more specific to taking advantage of what can only be done in VR and actually allowing for breaking the laws of physics and allowing for experiences and narratives that are very specific to that environment. And the production, though, was pretty interesting because we actually ended up doing as much as we could to make Actors Theater feel comfortable with their workflow. They put on incredible award-winning productions, and we wanted to make sure that this felt normal to them, especially since we were helping out in both a real-life version and a VR version. And what became fascinating, though, is this was an incredibly spread out production on the VR side. For the IRL side, everyone was there in Louisville in the theater for rehearsals and doing everything in person. But for the VR side, we were doing these kinds of rehearsals where Ari was at his house in Oregon, and my team was in New York City, and he would rehearse, and then Robert Barry Fleming, the director, would put on a VR headset and connect to our cloud computers and be in basically the virtual rehearsal room watching Ari perform. And he, picked different spots that he thought the audience might like and started to plan out actor blocking and things like that. So, with that in mind, there were some key factors for our ractor and his ractive, which only made this possible recently. We couldn't have done a show like this even a year before. And I'll go through these in more detail, but just to have them in the back of your mind for a moment, low-cost cloud computing, free and expressive digital humans, and free and expressive performance capture. So what made this special? Well, now it's a good chance to rewind a little bit to understand what I was up to in the years leading up to this on the virtual performance side, which really kicked off in earnest in 2018. That's when I met Philip Rosedale in person, the creator of Second Life and High Fidelity VR, and we started to talk about what would make a virtual reality live event particularly compelling. And he asked me if I could assemble a team of New York City theater makers who could study different ways of putting on live shows in VR. And we ended up writing papers and creating diagrams and had these very systematic studies of different kinds of experiences. And we got a lot of wonderful people involved, performers and people coming from a traditional background, people coming from a more tech-focused background, and had a lot of fun playing with what happens when you're translating something that you understand a certain way in the physical world, which you could also call skeuomorphism, and then how that becomes something similar, but maybe starting to jump off into new directions in the virtual world. So we generally start with a one-to-one translation and then kind of go wild from there. This is one of my favorite studies, by the way, with larval masks and looking at what happens when you abstractify, that's not a word, an avatar enough to the point where you don't even have a body, just hands and feet tracked, and then like one expression, because we were working within the limits of what social VR could provide.
My baby! Mama! Mama!
So some of the things we were studying included avatar selection, looking at the uncanny valley, when you make something more stylized, what are different audience performer dynamics you can work with, what's an ideal performer background, and it turned out to be improv, which, you know, no big surprise. They could yes and the heck out of things breaking. If their leg stopped working, they would just add a limp to their character, and, you know, they're having fun. And then you saw just very briefly the way they could play with scale and flying and changing their avatars very quickly. So it was really cool to watch them play in that sandbox. And that led as well to playing in other platforms. For example, Mozilla Hubs, which for anyone who doesn't know, is a free, super accessible way to get together socially, not just in VR, but even just from a browser. The whole thing, there's no app, you just go to a link and you're suddenly inside a virtual world. But as we started to go through this, we found that it was very difficult to reach the level of customization that we wanted to have with our live shows, because social VR, and I include in this VR chat, AltSpace, Rec Room, high fidelity VR when that existed, Mozilla Hubs, all these platforms we started to play around in has different priorities and different goals from a live performance. For example, if you and I are both inside social VR, maybe I want to look like Pikachu and you want to look like the Iron Giant, and now we're going to go watch a live theater show together, and someone says, hey, that's taking up a lot of our bandwidth because you have some very high polygon models, and we'd really like you to change into these avatars which fit the mood of the show, and it's going to keep our poly count down. And then you and I just say, no, we're not going to do that, because you can't really force anyone to do anything inside most social VR platforms. In many cases, it's even difficult to mute someone. Like, you can report someone and say bad behavior, but if you're trying to have the level of control over a live show that most performers and show creators want to have, then social VR isn't going to usually cut it for you. And I liked having, stylization that we had to work within. There's a certain term of freedom within limits where it's like, oh, hey, just having a head that pulsates in Mozilla Hubs, that's enough to communicate a certain style. I mean, I grew up with this being the height of facial capture performance, with just like a little nodding head, and I found this incredibly cinematic, and I believed every emotion coming out of Solid Snake's face. So, I think we were happy to work within the limits we had, but at a certain point, we just wanted to have a level of control that went beyond those tools. Those were great tools, but sometimes you just need a chainsaw, and a hacksaw isn't going to cut it. So what I also found too was that we could start to get very custom, but then we ran into the trouble of what's going to be the minimum spec. We started to build applications where it's like, okay, we can have metahumans, for example, and it can be inside a wireless standalone headset, but you're going to spend so much time optimizing and cranking down the quality of everything that it starts to not be that much better than what you could achieve, at least fidelity-wise, in existing social platforms. So back to these three things that made a huge difference for us. Cloud computing, well, the major things here were, first of all, accessibility. Cloud computing helped both the audience and the creators of shows that we began to work on solve the problem of accessibility by giving everyone a powerful machine streaming right to their wireless VR headset or desktop browser, because we don't want to exclude people who don't have VR headsets. Kind of like GeForce Now or Xbox Live, for anyone who's played with those before. And on the VR side, in fact, we were using a modified version of NVIDIA Cloud XR, and to my knowledge, thanks to how HeavenU is set up, we currently represent the largest virtual machine usage for an event taking place in VR simultaneously. Additionally, something kind of stressful about live performances in social VR is, depending on what you've built, they might crash or behave differently on all sorts of different devices and hardware, and there's almost never a way to test all of those possible configurations ahead of a live show. And if you're making a video game and you find out that Windows 11 computers with MSI motherboards and RTX 3060s unexpectedly mute the tutorial dialogue at the very beginning, you can create a patch to fix that. But I've seen that kind of thing happen in a live show, and it's not great. All you can really do is apologize, because it needs to be ready when you go live. Additionally, for cloud computing, a single spec is really useful, because that becomes the specification that you're troubleshooting on. It's no longer looking at all these different configurations and what could go wrong with all of them. We only had 3 Unreal Engine artists, myself and the artist known as June, coming right out of architecture school, actually, and Rob Lester. And the 3 of us had to make this show work by hell or high water. And with cloud computing, you basically make a golden image, and you can set it up to have whatever you need in terms of drivers and what virtual graphics card you want to use. And then you're replicating that out for everyone who's going to be a part of the show. So that just allows for a unity of experience across the board that just simplifies a lot of different things. On the cloud computing side, also a very small team. My CTO, Eitan, just did wonders with figuring out how to propagate mocap data and audio and everything we needed so that everyone was having the same synced experience with minimal latency. Going over to, clicky click, whoop, nope, too far. Going over to Free Digital Humans, MetaHuman Creator was a really amazing tool that only came out about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, actually. And a fun statistic, Epic looked at a study in 2017 of how many digital characters had been created for different kinds of productions in that year. And in 2017, they estimated about 50,000 characters had been made worldwide. In the less than a year since MetaHuman Creator came out, there's already been over 1 million custom digital humans created, and that's pretty remarkable because this is free. This also runs on the cloud. Anyone right now can go to metahuman.unrealengine.com and just start designing a person who you can bring into any Unreal Engine project. It's pretty cool. And the uncanny valley is particularly uncanny in VR, so you want to make sure that your characters are well designed. If you're going to go away from abstraction and away from stylization and low poly models, and you actually want to make something look the way you want it to, you better be sure that this is going to not terrify people in VR. And we massaged the metahumans a lot. It was actually really cool to start to compare different variations of Scrooge, for example, and figure out where in VR did he just feel unsettling, and not in a Scrooge kind of way, but like there's something off. And then when did he get to a point where it really felt like there was a person there behind those digital eyes. And by the way, the most expensive part of our facial capture pipeline, because LiveLink Face is free on the iPhone, is the helmet. Those helmets go for like over $1,000. Someone at ILM hooked us up, thank you, and we got a Technoprops helmet. But you can make little like $70 versions from Amazon parts and GoPro pieces like I did. So just so you know, that is something you can do on your own. Now, with everything that I've just gone through, you might be thinking like, oh, cool, these 3 things, cloud computing, free digital humans, easy, free performance capture from an iPhone, sounds like everything's solved, right? You could do, wait a minute, why did this production take 3 months with some very long weeks in some case? Shouldn't it have taken like 3 days based on how wonderful technology has gotten? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. So I want to just briefly go through a few sad things that made production more difficult. But don't worry, at the end of this is a nice light at the end of the tunnel where I will be able to explain why things got better. But wow, we only have 7 minutes left. Let me go through this quick. Not inside of VR was a little bit tricky for our actor because he wanted to be able to connect with the performers there. Ari and many VR actors are used to being able to make eye contact with everyone in the show. We couldn't do that with this because we wanted full facial capture, and the OmniCept from HP and the HTC Vive Pro Eye with a face tracker weren't quite up to par with metahumans yet. Body capture is still pretty expensive, though there are some cool solutions coming out like Move.ai and Radical, which actually will do pretty good live mocap from a phone, so that's on its way. SteamVR still crashes all the time, so even with our replicated cloud machines, we were constantly troubleshooting SteamVR bugs. What I would love to see, and I hope whoever's watching this video 5 years from now, this is like, oh, of course, that happened in 2023. I want to see a browser like WebXR that bypasses the need for SteamVR entirely and allows you to connect to a cloud computer, kind of like Mozilla Hubs. You just go to a link, and now you can use the power of something much further further away. That would be delightful because Steam VR is still a big bottleneck for a lot of this. And then costumes and physics took a long time. Syncing up all the data, audio, mocap was tricky. Cues and multiplayer replication to make sure everything fired in the way it needed to, and determining if those signals should be built into an Unreal Engine multiplayer system or something specific to our kind of cloud walled garden. Figuring out what the audience agency should be. Oh, and by the way, I've got a few videos there. There's Steam VR crashing. Here's the costumes that we had to make. June had never used Marvelous Designer before and had to figure that out pretty quick. And for audience agency, here's what, whoops. We had a little video here of being able to light the show in a certain way. You could actually move around and you had 2 flashlights in each hand and got to control what you were actually going to see, which was pretty cool. And then, yes, I broke the show because right before the very first performance, I made a little change that I thought was going to make things a little bit better, and it made things a lot worse. I basically doubled the amount of rendering that needed to be happening in each frame because I added a camera, which I was just checking a face, and it made things worse. So, you know, there's a bunch of potential points of failure. So I want to show you a really quick demo before we end the talk, and then we'll go over to do some Q&A in the other room. But with all of this in mind, I want you to be able to weigh some of the pros and cons of this list here, and note that this is not mutually exclusive. You can mix and match things. For example, Scrooge and Dickens and all the characters that Ari was playing were all live, but everything else was recorded. And so you can then also begin to support things like different kinds of audiences. You can have a VR audience and a browser-based audience and a live stream audience, but it is more difficult to design an experience where all of those are equally served. So these are kind of the ranges and the spectrums that you can start to play with. But I hope, based on this one particular example of a show, you can start to have this in the back of your mind. But what was really special for me personally was that I finally got to have that experience that I wanted way back in London, where getting up close to Ari, especially in some of his quieter moments, not the big spectacles with exploding Marley and fire and brimstone, but watching him very subtly move between different characters and feeling that light change behind his eyes as he becomes more and more immersed in the story he's telling to us all, and feeling that introspection. That was exactly what I experienced in 2008, and I'm really excited to see where this is going to go in the future. And it was kind of interesting too, because Dickens and Scrooge were the only 2 avatars he had, but he would swap between those at interesting moments where he'd still be portraying Bob Cratchit, Mrs. Cratchit, Tiny Tim, and it took on different meanings depending on how he used the different characters. So that was pretty interesting as well. Okay, so what we're building now is a cloud editor that is intending to simplify everything that we just did. I always love when people show really early work in progress stuff. We've been working on this for like 2 weeks, but we thought, let's take the tools of what we developed as part of building Christmas Carol, and what if we tried to make it so that the entire show that we had for Christmas Carol could be rebuilt from scratch in a matter of about, 3 days. 3 days instead of 3 months. That's kind of the goal. And so we're trying to create a system that runs in a browser connected to a cloud computer, allows you to import metahumans, props. Unreal Engine has all sorts of runtime components for Datasmith and GLTF and FBX. And so being able to bring those things in and then start to just set up cues for when things happen, changing the weather, changing the set design, and be able to then publish a show. You'll see the little publish button in the bottom left, and then having that instantly become a golden image on the cloud, which you can then propagate to 1,000 audience members the moment you're done. So then anyone who wants to join in a VR headset on a browser can start to experience this. That's something that interests us very much. How do we take the 3-month life cycle that we had of putting on a live show using all these latest technologies and make it easier for anyone who might want to venture into this world who doesn't necessarily even know Unreal Engine? That is our goal. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to show you guys one really quick thing. You can clap though for a second. Go ahead and clap. Thank you. With the 2 minutes we have left, I wanted to show you the Heavenue editor running live, kind of in the cloud, just on a different computer right now. And you'll notice that if I just connect to LiveLink Face right now, this actually just goes directly into here, although it is a little bit glitchy. That's weird. Must be like a funky internet connection. But I'm Scrooge right now. And oh, you know what it is? It's the lighting. It's like very confused by the lighting. But what's kind of fun about this is I could, for example, turn this into a game where I now get to play Scrooge. And you could do this with any of the characters. You could have recorded elements and live elements. So watch this. I can say, "Who are you?
Much.
What do you want with me? Who are you?"
Life I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
"You look fettered. Why?"
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it.
Yeah.
Is its pattern strange?
And you can go full screen here, and oh yeah, sure, yeah, you can clap. That's fun. And it's crazy because I could even then start to play in here, and I could add in additional characters and connect them all to different LiveLink Face instances. So because my talk needs to end now, if anyone wants to play in the sandbox a little bit, if you want to download LiveLink Face on your phone, if you want to try this whole thing in a VR headset in a browser, I've got like a little goodie bag of just here's stuff we're playing with. Would love to get feedback, and please follow me over to the special Q&A room after, and let's chat more. Thanks, everyone.